my period's coming. I don't know what these people are talking about. Do you know what they're talking about?
That felt pretty great.
I'll spend the rest of the year worrying about what I just said.
Perhaps I should explain.
I'm sure you've noticed a pattern lately in women-led stories.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that's about.
When we think about breaking the fourth wall, characters such as Deadpool, Ferris Bueller, and Wayne probably come to mind, but there are arguably endless examples. When I told my mom I was researching this topic, she immediately responded, Bob Hope.
Stick around, folks. He could be wrong, you know.
It's been used as a joke or a device that's used to communicate to the audience something that could not be communicated within the boundaries of the medium.
It's up to you.
Addressing the audience directly has always existed in theater and literature. Metafictional works are those in which the story references itself, or those in which the characters are aware of themselves being in this fictional world.
Do you think the scene should have been cut? We were so worried when the boys were writing it.
Metafiction is frequently used in parody, for example, but it also provides a layer of awareness for the reader that is not always humorous. It can be explicit or implicit, direct or indirect. It can also be critical, used to suggest that the work itself is inauthentic. At the very least, all metafiction holds up a mirror to the audience, showing them what they are actively consuming. The work says to you, this is a story you are experiencing.
We are nothing without stories. And so we invite you to believe in this one.
Beyond that reminder exists an endless variety of paths for the audience to journey, depending on the author's purpose. So that's metafiction, but the term itself didn't come along until 1970. The concept of the fourth wall, however, is much, much older. In 1758, Denis Diderot wrote on the subject of theater. Regardless whether you are writing or playing, don't think about the spectator, as if he did not exist at all. Imagine that there is a big wall at the edge of the stage that separates you from the pit. Play as if the curtain was never raised. Now, this was a time when theater was moving beyond the strict boundaries of tragedy and comedy, and audiences were more sophisticated and educated. It's almost as if the audiences didn't want to be addressed directly. Rather, the illusion of the play was a sort of sacred picture that existed in the frame of the proscenium arch. Into the late 1800s and through most of the 20th century, realism on stage became the norm and protected this sacred picture. Audiences were more interested in watching a realistic portrayal of life in which they were an invisible spectator. The sacred illusion of the theater helped to convey elevated ideas to a variety of audiences, contrasted with what was previously widely practiced, where the character looks to the audience to explicitly state a straightforward message, to guide the audience through the drama.
Her eye discourses. I will answer it. I am too bold.
Now we have these rules, this understanding that in order to be seen as serious theater, the play should maintain that fourth wall, maintain the illusion. But rules exist to be broken. So in musicals or over-the-top slapstick comedies, we do see the breaking of the fourth wall. But defining the norm on stage is not exactly easy because in the 20th century, cinema essentially replaced theater. And the audience that existed beyond the fourth wall now also existed in the camera itself. This brings us to the topic of gaze, G-A-Z-E. Now, this concept has a history beyond cinema, going back to the birth of psychoanalysis. In this discipline, the gaze is an individual's or group's awareness and perception of other individuals, other groups, or oneself. French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan wrote significantly on the topic through studying identity and desire. I recommend checking out Plastic Pill's video on Lacan, which I've cited in the notes below. For this video, I'm going to summarize some relevant points. How do we know we are funny or attractive? There are two parts to this, according to Lacan. One is that we know because other people outside of us are looking at us and forming these opinions about us. The second part, and most important part, is that we are seeing and deciphering within our subconscious how people are reacting to us. So this is how an individual knows they are attractive, because of how they are interpreting how other people react to them. The desire to be seen comes from the desire to be a whole person. This is the gaze in Lacanian theory, and along with Freudian theory, we now have the basis of psychoanalytic film theory. Psychoanalytic film theory examines film as a portrayal of or a way of communicating with the unconscious. The concept of gaze is at the core of this theory. Another way Lacan explains gaze is as the feeling the subject has when the object one is viewing looks back. This is where things get interesting. Power dynamics has entered the chat. Post-Lacanian psychoanalysis starts to explore this relationship between subject and object. To gaze implies more than just to look at. The gazer is the subject, the one they're gazing at is the object. It inherently brings with it questions of who has more power. Different disciplines use the term to refer to negative dynamics that occur, such as medical gaze and the gaze as it exists in prisons and in schools. And of course, if you're familiar with my videos, you know that Laura Mulvey begins to study gaze from a feminist perspective and eventually writes the impactful essay Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema in 1975, where she coined the term female gaze. In 1992, Bell Hooks coined the term oppositional gaze, which is a gaze that involves rebellion and resistance against being othered. Not only will I stare, I want my look to change reality.
There is power in looking.
Oppositional gaze works by creating Black media by Black creators for Black audiences. Hooks was also clear that Black women were still often used as objects of the male gaze in Black independent media. So oppositional gaze implores Black women to look back in defiance. She states, looking at films with oppositional gaze, Black women were able to critically assess the cinema's construction of white womanhood as object of phallocentric gaze, male gaze, and choose not to identify with either the victim or the perpetrator. Another perspective is from Bracha L. Ettinger, who proposed the concept of matrixial gaze, in which the so-called matrix symbolizes the feminine, but also envelops the masculine. The concept seeks to move beyond sex, race, or gender, but is not widely discussed in the realm of film, although I find it quite interesting. Generally put, the topic of gaze has always invited discussions about desire and power, but clearly none of this has to be a binary, and it doesn't have to be along gender lines. Whenever we discuss the concept of the male gaze, it's purposefully meant to criticize the norm, not to offer up an opposite alone. Rather, we're searching for many perspectives and alternatives. So what's happening now? The concept of breaking the fourth wall moved from theater to cinema, but its use is entirely different. The fourth wall existed as a concept to legitimize serious theatrical production. Aside from sitcoms which use live audiences, most film does not include this component, and therefore there is no need for the concept of the fourth wall. Instead, we have a camera, which in theory contains the audience.
Aren't you overacting a little bit, Miss Baldwin? Baldwin? It's a movie, see, I'm fine. The people in the theater know I ain't gonna die. Here, it's a movie, stay here, look.
Looking directly into the lens is not as common as it once was, but it does show up as a filming technique in quirkier films, sometimes just to make the viewer feel uncomfortable. Combined with metafiction, looking into the camera directly and addressing the audience, this technique can make the viewer feel like an active participant in the fiction. For example, a lot of viewers of Fleabag say that this technique makes them feel like her best friend. Remember Lacanian theory? In film, these concepts on identity and gaze encourage us to think about how the gaze back affects the audience. When the character looks into the camera and directly addresses the audience, we are being told how the character is perceiving being perceived. This is very similar to Joey Soloway's discussion on the female gaze.
How it feels to be the object of the gaze. So the camera then talks out at you from its position as the receiver of the gaze. It is actually repping the gazed gaze. It says this is how it feels to be seen.
The camera itself is a character, or at least it can be. In mockumentary-style television, the camera person is a character and therefore captures things that character sees as important. But in other cinema, the director of the camera is capturing the things they desire, sometimes subconsciously so, and this projects the desires of the director onto the audience. So what if the camera is treated not as an extension of the director, not as a device to capture what they desire, and instead is treated as a character that is moving along with the object in the frame and is even acknowledged by the object? Or what happens when the camera is from the perspective of another character? Or, such as in Breaking Bad, when the camera is from the perspective of an inanimate object. In these instances, the gaze is shifting so that the audience cannot otherize what is in the frame. Instead, they are acquiring the identification of the perspective of the camera and made aware of their own gaze. So what's important about seeing women in film addressing the audience and the camera? When male characters address the audience, they drop the persona they have up in front of the other characters.
Look at these. I used to dream I'd be surrounded by exotic women's underwear forever and ever. Now I know they just save their best pairs for the nights they know they're gonna sleep with somebody.
They're revealing something more, something intimate to the audience. And most importantly, they're speaking to the men in the audience.
They never make these cars big enough, do they?
They're speaking to the male viewer. The joke is between the male viewer and the male subject on screen.
What a pisser.
So fourth wall breaks, traditionally, have not only not involved women, they haven't addressed women.
Just to be clear, it's not that I haven't always known you were there.
Whereas when these women characters address the audience, they're addressing the women in the audience.
Right, but look, I can't be with no guy that ain't kept a job for more than a week in his life. So this one, he's gonna be smart, yeah? He's gonna have his own place, like drive one car like, whoa, a businessman, you know what I mean? He's a tiger, but can also be gentle, like Drake.
The joke here is between the woman in the frame and the women in the audience.
Yes, it's a self-contained wedding episode, and if you think this is happening at an inconvenient time in the season, you're right, because that's how weddings always are. But I'm gonna look great, so let's go.
This causes the feminization of the audience.
But for me, who chooses to wear it, the bust enhancer and the hip regulators will hide the fortune my mother has given me.
In the same way that this causes the masculization of the audience. Not only are the women in the frame being perceived, they're perceiving the women in the audience. This technique seeks to legitimize the experience of the character and make it universal. And when used with characters who are not male, not white, not cisgender, it further legitimizes the experiences of these groups. At the end of the day, we don't just want to be seen, but perceived. It comes from a desire to be whole, to discover our true selves. But according to Lacan, that will never be realized. So we tumble through the world, constantly searching for wholeness. And when someone we relate to looks back and acknowledges we are looking, we are given the opportunity to gain a small piece of understanding ourselves and the world just a little better.